Welcome to In the Reads, the podcast for San Jose State University's Read Magazine, California's oldest literary journal. My name is Daniel Mandujano,
And I'm Angela Lee.
and this is the debut of our new segment, Read Between the Lines, where we interview notable figures in the Read Magazine world that help our team bring Read Magazine to life.
Today's episode, we're interviewing Dr. BrookMcClurg, the newest editor-in-chief of Read Magazine. He's a creative writing professor at San Jose State, an award-winning creative nonfiction writer, and a newly published author.
Angela and I sat down to talk with Brooke about his history with Read Magazine, his creative writing journey, and the ins and outs of his newest book, A Dictionary of Modern Consternation. Stay tuned. This is In the Reads. BrookMcClurg joins us today. He is an assistant professor of nonfiction in the English and Comparative Literature Department at San Jose State University. A Fulbright Research Fellow, his nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and translation work has appeared in several literary journals. His essay, Geometry of Absence, was listed as a notable essay in Best American Essays 2021. His first book, A Dictionary of Modern Consternation, published this year, won the Permafrost Prize in Nonfiction. He has written for daily and monthly publications, domestic and foreign, in both print and web environments. We know him as a professor, but today we are here to interview him as Read Magazine's new chief editor. BrookMcClurg, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Brooke. So as the new chief editor, did you have any future endeavors or plans for Read? For example, in comparison to previous issues, would there be any changes or continuities or perhaps consistencies in terms of the magazine's design or themes?
Sure. I think really the way that I'm approaching it is partially due to its long legacy. My immediate plan is just to leave things as they are, certainly for a cycle or two until I sort of get the hang of it. I think it'd be a little presumptuous to come in and change things before knowing, sort of what all is going on there. I figure most things that people are doing, they're doing for a reason. So I think there might be changes down the line, but most immediately, my plan is just to sort of continue the legacy by gently stepping in. That's how I'd like to do it.
All right, that's great. How would you describe the legacy that you say that you believe that Reed has? And according to that perception, how do you envision the future of Reed?
Sure. Well, it's branded itself as California's oldest literary journal, which those kinds of claims are always somewhat tentative, it seems like, right? So we know that it was a student-run journal that's seen various iterations over the years. So I would like to solidify that a little bit and maybe dig more into the archives and publish some things from the archives. I have some different sort of ideas around that I think can be useful in sort of continuing to articulate that legacy. Similarly, coincidentally, I actually had a relative who went to San Jose State in the 40s. It's my grandmother's sister and was part of student publications then. And I spent some time in the archives in our library looking at student-run publications from back at that time, researching family history. And so I have this personal tie-in to what it means to be continuing the work of people that I love that are generations before, right? So I just have a lot of respect for the work that the students are doing, and I feel like I want to honor that and keep highlighting that as we move forward.
It's totally fascinating how it's part of your family history. It's
Wow,
great.
right? I
Yeah,
didn't
I
even
agree.
know when I first came, actually.
Mhm. Although you are the chief editor, you are also a creative writer, specializing in creative nonfiction. How would you describe your creative process and how that affects the creative direction of Read?
I don't know if my own creative process really affects, my role in Read at all. I think it's more just how I feel about the work that comes in. I've sort of started at the far end of the slush pile where even before that, when you're just sending things out and you have no idea how it's going to be received in the world, when you're just sort of dipping a toe in this sort of public market. Um, and then I've worked at journals at all of the universities that I've gone to, starting again at the slush pile, working up to managing editor. Um, and so I guess I just have a lot of um, respect for what it takes for people to send things in, right? And so I want to treat them carefully and fairly. I think part of what you can learn from sending things out too is just realistically, like, are these things, sort of market ready? Are they ready to be published? And so I guess just wanting to treat people fairly, wanting to make sure that we're publishing a wide range of voices, diverse range of voices, about a diverse range of subjects as well. Um, yeah, that's all important to me, and that's how I see moving forward.
Interesting. Moving on to your own writing, when did you start writing and when did you choose to pursue it?
That's a great question. So I've been doing some writing my whole life. I know that probably seems like lip service that some people do, but it wasn't literary. And for years, I was a songwriter, and I released records that way. And so I've been putting work out to the public sphere for some time. But the move towards writing books is completely different, right? And certainly literary works. And so I sort of just decided, I had this one particular story that I wanted to tell, that happened to be a nonfiction story. I still haven't done that yet, but we're getting to that. And and so the first thing I sort of ripped off a draft of it in a month, got up every day at 4 a.m. and, like, got this story out. And when I finished, the one thing that was clear to me was that it was not good at all, right? Like, I knew that one thing. And so what I knew I needed to do was I needed to go back to learn more, right? To relearn how to write, for audiences, for literary audiences. And so that's when I decided to go back to school, and ended up doing the MFA and the PhD as well. And in fact, even when I finished MFA, I felt like there was still more for me to learn, and I wanted to spend more time doing it. And so, yeah, that's sort of been my journey toward writing literary works.
Nice. Anthony Bourdain said, writing is a privilege and a luxury. Anyone who whines about writer's block should be forced to clean squid all day. How do you deal with writer's block? Do you dive deeper into your creative process or step away and let inspiration find you?
That's great. Well, first, I love this. I love this quote. For several reasons. I mean, first of all, I think um, I agree. Like, sure, it's hard, but all other work is harder, just about, right? I mean, mostly what we're doing is we're at our desks wrestling with ourselves. And I think we can become very self-involved with our worlds and our thoughts. And so sometimes it can be useful to step away and do any work, any other work, right? And certainly physical labor as opposed to mental can sometimes be good. I'm tempted to say I don't believe in writer's block, but I know as soon as I say that, I will, like, have a debilitating case, so I won't say it. I refuse to. But mainly what I mean by not believing in writer's block is that I believe in having, like, a work ethic around writing. So whether that means, getting up daily and committing to a certain number of words or a certain number of pages, I feel like that can be really useful. But even more so than that, sometimes when I do that, I'm maybe producing work, but maybe not particularly inspired work. And so the thing that I find that helps me the most is when I am really stuck, what I generally need to do is read more. Because when I'm reading other people's work, I find myself arguing with it or in conversation with it or just simply inspired by it and with tricks I want to try. Um, and so generally, when I get stuck in any way, it's a sign that I need to pick up some fresh work and, like, go on a little journey. And it almost always gives back to me rather quickly now. That wasn't always the case. It took a lot longer before, but at this point, because I just find so much other work quite inspiring.
That's actually pretty great because we're actually wondering, speaking about work ethic and sort of finding like new habits or like new, I guess, like journeys. Are there any skills you learned from your time as a salesman that helped you in your writing and or teaching?
That's a funny question because I mean the answer is sort of yes, right? But not the parts I want to engage with, right? So I sort of poke fun at this in the book that essentially book writing is in the end a sales job because then you're expected to turn around and sell it. And so I guess I'm somewhat aware of the things that I'm not doing to sell the book right now, like because it does start to become a different job entirely. But I will say that all of those things help me directly with the stuff that I have to do with Read, right? So things like understanding budgets, understanding like, what the year looks like for us annually, how we need to sort of go to market with some of the things that we're trying to do. So it's useful for both, but it's funny, I feel a little more empowered to engage in that mode when it's not just on behalf of me, right? Like there's something that's, when you're just selling your book for you, it's kind of like, yes, please buy my thing, right? But for Read, it's more like, well, what can I do to, get all these voices out into the most hands possible? And that can be fun.
I see. Right. So inspirations change as we develop as people. Are your inspirations now the same as when you started writing, or did they change as you achieved different milestones in your life? For example, after you became a husband, a father, receiving your PhD, and so forth.
I would say that what's changed is my approach to some of the things. So, like, the themes are generally the same. I write a lot about families, sometimes intergenerational trauma, uh, mixed identity and what it means to sort of exist between cultures and places. Um, and a lot certainly about fatherhood and fathers and things like this. And I think what's changed the most as I've gotten older and as I become a father myself is really just the grace I try to give people on the page. I mean, when we're just talking about characters, say in fiction or something like that, we talk about flat and round characters and how what you do to sort of complicate them and make them full, whole people. And certainly that's never more true than in real life when we're talking about people who maybe sometimes make bad decisions, um, but have all kinds of maybe good reasons to do so. And so I guess trying to approach a lot of the characters with a lot more grace and I guess just a lot more patience around even my own understanding of things, I guess, is probably the things that have changed the most with time.
I see. So would you say that you kind of draw like inspiration from, I guess, like other people's stories, like in your own life or like friends, family?
Sure, I would say to some degree, because I specialize in nonfiction, so much of what I am doing is about real things that have happened to me. Um, and sometimes those around me, but primarily me or things that I'm seeing in daily life. Yeah.
I see. Do you perhaps have any like favorite stories in in like the form of books, essays, or movies that you draw inspiration from or have drawn inspiration from in the past?
I have all kinds of favorite stories or pieces that I could share. Some of my favorite fiction pieces are like, I'm going back a little bit here, but like The School by Donald Barthelme. I love that one, which is just like this thing that keeps ratcheting up. It's like a super short story, but it's doing so much. I think it's fantastic. Or also like Waterliars by Barry Hannah. That's some of the like fiction stuff that I like. For essays, my favorite of all time is Joanne Beard's Fourth State of Matter. I'm actually reading the full book in one of my classes, but it's just such a lovely example of a braided essay, and it's doing so much. It's just sort of fantastic. And then, when it comes to books these days, and perhaps my latest book is influenced by this, but I was really getting into sort of like textual strangeness and how do we complicate either narratives by fragmentation or by, like nonlinear storytelling. And then how do we also implement archival research into this? So with that, I'm thinking of books like Sheila O'Connor's Evidence of V or Don Mi Choi's DMZ Colony, where these books are just sort of like we see the process of trying to create narrative from these stories break down on the page and then sort of get reconstituted in the process of the storytelling, right? So,
I'll definitely have to check those out. Those sound very fascinating. Um, do you have an idea of how you want your work to be perceived? Like, is there a specific message you aim to convey, or do you let the piece speak for yourself or speak for itself?
yeah, I don't. I mean, I like to think there's room for both of those things in there, right? Like I definitely have my positionality that I'm sort of coming at these things with, but I'd like to think that there's also room left in there for interpretation and for it to become bigger than just sort of whatever my small view of things are. Beyond that, I wouldn't say that I have too much of a view for it.
So in your online writing portfolio, your works are paired with a photograph. Did you take these photos yourself?
Oh, I did. Is this from the website?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was living in Mexico City at the time, and I was like obsessed with doors because there's just so many like amazing doors there. And so, I mean, that was like all I was doing was like walking the city. I was walking extensively at the time, like 5 miles a day, and I would like just go through different neighborhoods and take pictures of all the doors. I've only ever taken like a high school level photography class, although I'm still friends with that photography teacher today.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I took all those myself, and it was just a lot of fun. I don't know when you think about the possibilities of doors, right?
Yeah. I mean, the door photos are pretty good. I also like the mural photos
Hmm.
um, that pair with your essays and
Thanks. Yeah,
stories.
the murals were fantastic, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many beautiful ones there, and I've got a like long track record of loving graffiti, like going back to like high school and those those days. And so I'm always eager to sort of I guess be in conversation with like street art. I think it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about your eye for photography and like how does it relate to your writing skills if it does? Do you think both art forms speak to each other or separated versus circumstance and process?
Well, I think they certainly can. I mean, so much of what I'm doing with when I talk about these more experimental books, they're normally marrying some portion of the visual with the textual, right? So this in this work that just came out, there's sort of the main body text, which looks like a dictionary. There's the footnotes where a sort of an experimental memoir is happening, and then there's actual images from old Merriam-Webster's dictionaries, right? But they're always presented in a way that's non-literal. So there's a conversation happening between the image and the text and the white space. And like, for example, a couple of my favorite ones are when like there's an entrance for like, say, man spreading, and next to it is a picture of a peacock. And so it's talking about how like in animal tendencies, there's this bluffing behavior where animals make themselves seem bigger than they are, right? Or with I have a thing for custody that's talking about um, it's really talking about prison rates within the United States, and it's next to an image of somebody conferring knighthood, which is really like this idea that who you are at birth is going to set you up towards potentially prison or royalty, and there might not be much difference in between there. Do you know what I mean? So like in all of these things, I'm trying to have a conversation between the image itself and the text as well. So I don't feel in any way particularly gifted at photography, although I love photographs. But anytime I can marry image with visual, I'm ecstatic about it. It feels like play, so I love it.
It's great that you mentioned further about the process of your book because we also were curious. When did you know you wanted to write your book, A Dictionary of Modern Consternation, and how long did it take to write?
Thanks. So, I don't know if there's ever a point where I knew I wanted to write that book. It was more like it was sort of right at the start of the pandemic, and I was starting to play with different things. I love short forms, I love flash forms, and I love the idea of like satire. And it's right at the time when everyone's like, "Oh, satire's dead. Like you can't do satire anymore." And I'm like, "Oh, can I?" And so all of a sudden, I just found myself sort of like marrying form with I guess process. And what started to happen was I found a form that on its face appeared to be quite limiting, right? Like when we think about a dictionary, we're like, "Oh, it's so rigid." But what I actually found is within that rigidity, there was actually tons of room to play. And that allowed me to speak on a broader range of topics because they were sort of hemmed in by this formal shape. So I wouldn't say I ever knew I wanted to do that until I had like fallen into it. It was just a mix of various elements that I really liked. And then in terms of how long it took, I tried to figure this out briefly when we talked about that, or when I knew this would be a question. But um, I think it was like 1 to 2 years to write, and I think it was like maybe 1 to 2 years to get to market. And like right now, like my son's 5 in the book, he's 10 now, so like clearly it's about 5 now. But the biggest unexpected thing about it was I thought I was done with the book several times, and then, you know, like by the time we got to say the editing stage, like the limits of what publishers could actually do started to really come into play in a way that caused me to have to change the book further. So for example, like so much of the text is footnoted, which is fine, but they wanted the footnotes to be at least a certain size. Okay, so now you have to make the footnotes a certain size without making the main body text too much bigger, right? So these kinds of things started to limit what each page could contain. And then it started to creep in on the white space, which I wanted. So I had to like push it back out and edit things down. So it actually ended up being just a very lengthy sort of final production process, much more than I would have thought. And the whole time I was just saying, like, why did I ever do this? Why did I choose this? But ultimately, I think it came out pretty close to how I envisioned it.
Hey, that's great. And as a consumer of your book right here, I was wondering, do you have plans for another book? And if so, what are those plans?
Thanks for picking that up. So there's this other book that I sort of alluded to earlier that was the book that drove me to the field of writing that I felt like I sort of had to get out. And it's a memoir. It's likely to focus more on a combination of early years and then maybe a few things that have happened lately. But it deals with many of these same themes. I mean, not so much the language thing, but the family thing is all prevalent there. And the biggest difference as I conceptualize it is that the book that you have, the one that just came out, is very much experimental. It's a sort of it's a kind of book that gets taught in experimental forms class. That's a small market book. Like a lot of people aren't willing to give the time or effort to get into a book like that. And I see the other book as being much more straightforward because I wouldn't want to limit the audience that much. I want it to be maybe a little more approachable to average readers. Like that feels important to me for the story. So I don't want to give away too much for it, but that's the thing that I've been working on for now, like way longer than I'd like to admit. And this other book sort of, skipped its place in line and jumped in front of it. So I want to go back and finish the other thing.
I see. Well, I'm looking forward to the new book, and when it comes out, I will be buying it for sure.
Thank you for that. That's awesome.
All right, that's all the questions we had for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. To the readers listening, you can find more about BrookMcClurg at his website, brookmcclurg.com. That is BrookMcClurg.com to find his notable works and blog. Brook, please feel free to plug and promote anything you like. Tell the people how to discover you.
Well, just go to the website is great, but also check out Read Mag at readmag.org, right? That'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you to all the readers listening. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Visit readmag.org, that is reedmag.org, to check out our literary magazine, where you can find our latest issue, number 157. Thank you so much, and take care.